Okay, we will start the roundtable, and the roundtable will end around 5:45. 5시 45분쯤까지 진행하고 끝낼 예정입니다. 예. The roundtable, serving as the finale of our conference, features 3 distinguished art historians from Harvard University. As mentioned in the opening remarks, one of our key organizers, Dr. Melissa McCormick, holds the Andrew W. Mellon Professorship of Japanese Arts and Culture in the Department of East Asian Languages and Civilization. She is the author of the notable monograph, Tosa, Mitsunobu, and the Small Scroll in Medieval Japan. And she is the founder of the Collective on Gender, Religion, and the Arts of Asia at Harvard University. Dr. Yukio Lippit is the Jeffrey T. Chambers and Andrea Okamura Professor of the History of Art and Architecture. He has made significant contributions to the field of Japanese art and architecture, with numerous monographs including Painting of the Rollum, the Kano House of Painters in 17th century Japan, which earned him the Charles Lufs Mori Book Award from the College Art Association, and the John Whitney Hall Book Prize from the Association for Asian Studies. Dr. Jinah Kim is the George P. Brickford Professor of Indian and South Asian Art in the Department of History of Arts and Architecture. She is the author of monographs Garland of Vision, Color, Tantra, and a Material History of Indian Painting, published in 2021, and Receptacle of the Sacred, Illustrated Manuscripts and the Buddhist Book Cards in South Asia. Recently, she was honored with the prestigious NEH Digital Advancement Grant. We are eager to hear the insights and perspectives of these famed scholars. During the roundtable, audience members are also encouraged to post questions through Zoom chat. Okay. Let's welcome our discussants to the floor.
Thank you very much, Yunmi. Is the mic okay? Mic is okay. Thank you very much. And thank you to all our speakers today for some incredibly illuminating talks. My eyes were definitely open to brand new material and new ways of thinking about some of my own work. And as everyone was speaking, I was constantly sort of drawing analogies in my mind to material from Japan and to traditions that I'm more familiar with. So it's been a very productive day today. And I wanted to begin my remarks by drawing upon something that Professor Sunglim Kim said at the last panel. And that was, while researching Sunjarni, she realized that she had kind of constricted her own understanding of the artist by framing her as a female artist, as a woman. And I wanted to use that comment to get us to think about what it means to be using language of the binary, for example, and the way in which gender theory and queer theory heightens our sensitivity to the use of language and the use of the specific words that we're drawing upon that have their own kind of baggage. And I think that term woman is one that's really productive to scrutinize, because even though, and someone coming from studying pre-modern culture, it seems clear-cut, where you have one character for man, one character for woman. You have a Confucian tradition, a Neo-Confucian tradition. You have yin and you have yang. You have this, what seems to be a very robust binary. In fact, when we look closely at artworks and literature, the word for woman or man or those categories is in fact often contingent. And its meaning is actually relational. And not only is it the meaning in flux in its own time, but I also think that we bring our own biases of what we think of when we hear the word woman to a woman artist of the past. And so it was especially a light bulb moment to hear someone who's working on a virtually contemporary artists say that that category of woman was also something that tripped them up in terms of doing kind of interpretive damage to the artworks that they're studying. And so I wanted to ask, did you want to summarize there? I just had one more comment after that, but.
오케이. 그럼 지금까지 말씀하신 거를 먼저 요약을 해드리자면요. 이제 멜리사 맥코믹 교수님은 일본 미술 전문이시기 때문에 오늘 이제 한국에 대해서 많은 걸 새로 배워서 굉장히 좋았다고 이제 말씀을 하셨고요. 그리고 이제 그 언어의 사용이라는 것에 대해서 조금 더 이제 관심 있게 들여다봤으면 한다고 하시면서 그 김성림 교수님이 마지막에 이제 말씀을 했던 그 이성자 작가가 스스로를 여성이라고 항상 이렇게 생각을 했고 거기에 그에 따라서 자기도 모르게 생겼던 제한이 나중에 내가 이런 프레임 안에 스스로를 가둬놨었구나라고 깨달았을 때 그걸 이제 깨고 나오신 거잖아요. 그래서 우리가 오늘 이제 학회에서 여성이라는 단어, 그러니까 woman이라는 단어를 많이 사용했는데 그 단어 자체를 좀 자세히 볼 필요가 있을 것 같다라는 말씀을 하셨습니다. 특히 이제 우리는 이제 유교 성리학 문화에 많이 이제 영향을 받았다 보니까 남녀, 음양 이런 거를 굉장히 이제 상호 배타적인 그런 관계로만 이제 생각을 하기 쉬운데 사실은 이제 남과 여 이런 것도 단지 이제 상호 배타적인 것이 아니라 이제 상호 관계된 단어일 수 있다 이런 말씀을 이제 하셨고 끝으로 이제 더 코멘트를 붙여주시겠습니다. You can continue.
Okay, and so continuing on that thought, just today I didn't hear much about gender neutrality or sort of moving beyond the binary. And so I'm also interested in what the speakers would think of their material in terms of the surrounding culture of their materials, if there's room to think about categories beyond the male-female binary, even if it's a non-modern topic, for example, and that might be related to someone taking Buddhist vows and removing all the markers, the physical markers of femininity or masculinity, or someone who ages out of the binary, or someone who is living a different lifestyle that doesn't fall into those categories, and whether or not that can be reflected in the art in terms of a gendered representation that confounds our expectations, which is also one aspect of talking about gender and performativity. And I think that was another big theme that we could apply to all of the papers today, but wasn't really spoken about much. But we could think about in more depth how all of the materials we heard about today are engaging in acts of gendered performance. So rather than sort of accepting the sort of acts of any of the artists or the results of those acts as falling into the category of their gender, maybe speaking about them in terms of a kind of temporary impersonation of a certain constructed gender role or gender language, gendered, or even when it comes to gendered objects in Professor Chung's artworks, so that the objects don't stay necessarily gendered. Watermelon isn't always a woman or a man, or maybe the watermelon is a woman. And so the idea that those motifs, like gender performance, are fungible in their meaning, and that they can be activated and charged in different ways according to who's in front of them, what literature that person just read, and what they're projecting as objects.
교수님께서 이제 오늘 학술 대회에서 이제 더 이제 생각해 볼 것들을 이제 짚어 주신 것 같은데요. 이제 젠더, 또 중성, 또 이런 것들을 이제 단순히 이분법적인 사고로만 생각하지 않고 그 이상의 것들도 더 이제 우리가 고려하면서 연구를 해보면 어떨까, 이런 제안을 주신 것 같습니다. 그래서 그런 것들을 이제 우리가 생각하게 해줄 수 있는 어떤 물건, 예술품들도 있을 거고요. 또 이제 사람 같은 경우도 뭐 이렇게 온갖 뭐 남녀의 표식을 다 벗어던진 승려나 비구니의 경우에는 우리가 이걸 단순히 이분법적인 젠더 논리 시각으로 볼 수 있을 것인지 꼭 그렇지는 않잖아요. 그래서 이렇게 좀 다양한 시각으로 볼 수 있는 다양한 주제들이 더 많을 것 같다. 뭐 이런 거를 이제 짚어주셨다고 생각하시면 될 것 같습니다. 그리고 또 하나 이제 그리고 이제 생활 패턴에 있어서도 꼭 이제 정형화된 여성의 삶, 남성의 삶을 살지 않는 사람들도 있는데 그런 경우는 또 이제 어떻게 접근하고 연구를 할 것인가 이런 질문도 던져주신 것 같고요. 그리고 또 이제 중요하게 생각해 볼 것, 그리고 오늘 발표에서 다들 다뤄주셨던 것이 이제 젠더와 퍼포머티비에 대한 것인데요. 퍼포머티비티는 제가 한국말로 뭐라고 딱 번역을 해야 될지 모르겠는데 혹시 박신혜 교수님 제안 있으신지? 수행성이요. 예. 이제 뭐 퍼포먼스, 퍼포머티비티 이런 게 굉장히 또 이쪽에서 사람들이 관심을 많이 두고 있는 키워드이거든요. 그래서 오늘 이제 그 발표하신 것들도 다 이제 어떻게 보면 이런 부분들을 건드리셨기 때문에 앞으로 이런 것들도 더 공부를 해볼 여지가 있는 것 같다고 이제 말씀하신 것 같습니다. 특히 이제 그 수박 말씀하시면서 수박이 이제 그림에서는 보통 여성을 상징하는데 이 수박도 이제 그림 안에서 일종의 수행성을 가지고 이제 등장한다 이런 논평도 해주신 것 같습니다. 감사합니다.
Can you hear me okay? Yep. Thank you. Well, again, my name is Jinah Kim, and I feel like I'm a complete interloper here because I don't actually study Korean art. I'm familiar with it and I can follow, but I am not an expert. I do work on mostly medieval South and Southeast Asia, but I am very much interested in issues of gender, especially looking for women in representation. And as my colleague, Professor McCormick, mentioned, sort of the category of woman is an interesting and important category, but we can often just be looking for women blindly, like I do sometimes. And that can be problematized, and really thinking about gender doesn't have to be just thinking about this binary categories. It really can be thinking dynamic relationality, and that's actually quite important to keep in mind because we tend to sort of see it in binary terms. And I think one thing that this conference really brought out in terms of sort of the scholarship and the materials, I was just blown away by all the materials that I have heard today and seen today, and also the day before Korean time conference materials that I've seen were just remarkable, and I'm just excited to learn about them. And I think what they also brought out is sort of less explored and not known much in scholarship, and often sort of focus on women, right? So that seems to be actually the key word throughout instead of gender, because there is a sort of gender. It's like women seen in the gender studies lens, right? So that seems to be kind of what I have noticed throughout today. And one thing that I have noticed this morning and this afternoon's panel is the kind of connecting thread that, so earlier morning paper by, I'm going to mess up who did what, Dr. Sue McCormick's paper on sumptuary law, for instance, in the 18th century Korea, to John Lee's paper in 19th century Korea, to, I guess, 20th century case of, so all these embroideries. And I think there were a lot of embroideries also discussed in the first day symposium papers. And I was really fascinated by this material and how in earlier centuries, it seems there is sort of this definition of this embroidery with femininity and like woman's world. Whereas this moment where at some point in early 20th century seems there is, or I'm not quite clear on the history of this moment, that there's a male embroiderers working the the case of male embroiderers working. And that is an interesting moment, it seems. And that actually makes me think about, because there seems to be a kind of continuity of embroidery tradition, but there is also rupture introduced through this, Japanese intervened modernization process that Korean Peninsula experiences. And what kind of can we sort of get at by looking at this sort of process through the lens of gender? And I really wanted to sort of kind of hear more about and think more about actually what does this lens of gender actually do in really advancing our thinking about this period of change and transformation in a way. So that's one thing that I kind of wanted to comment on. I'll stop there for. So I have just.
보면 뭘 더 볼 수 있을지 질문을 하신 건가요?
Yeah, so that's like one thing that I want us to think about and like going forward. So that's one question that I have for everyone to as sort of thinking about. And I have just one small comment after this.
감사합니다. 지금 김진아 교수님께서 이제 말씀하신 거를 번역을 해보자면, 이제 김진아 교수님은, 이제 인도 중세미술 전공이시지만 한국 미술에 대해서 친숙하시기 때문에 예, 내용을 오늘 이제 잘 따라갈 수 있었고, 잘 따라갈 수 있었다고 하셨고요. 그리고 또 김진아 교수님께서 또 마찬가지로 이제 그 여성 woman이 이제 중요한 카테고리이긴 하지만 또 동시에 이제 젠더를 다룰 때 이분법적인 사고에 이렇게 좀 다양한 이제 그 관점을 가질 수도 있을 것 같다. 예, 이런 제안을 주셨습니다. 그리고 또 오늘 굉장히 다양한 소재와 주제에서 주제를 이제 볼 수 있어서 좋았다고 이제 말씀하셨고요. 그리고 지난 금요일에 리움 학회에서 열렸던 그 발표됐던 내용들도 이제 유튜브로 시청을 하셨는데 내용이 굉장히 좋았다 이렇게 이제 말씀을 하셨습니다. 그리고 이제 오늘 오늘 이제 발표를 해주신 많은 분들께서 지금까지 이제 덜 연구됐던 것들을 새롭게 개척해서 이제 연구를 하시다 보니까 여성을 좀 많이 중점적으로 다뤄주게 된 것 같다 이렇게 이제 말씀을 하셨습니다. 그래서 이제 제가 이해한 게 맞다면 젠더 연구 안에서 이제 여성을 본 것 같다. 이제 이렇게 번역하면 괜찮을까요?
됐어.
이렇게 이제 평을 해주셨고요. 그리고 오늘 그 자수에 대해서 이제 발표해주신 박혜성 선생님, 그쵸? 박혜성 선생님, 맥코믹 박사님, 그다음에 이제 이재원 선생님 발표를 이제 언급을 해주시면서 이제 뭐 남성 자수장들이라든가 또 이제 전통이 어떻게 이제 지속되고 단절이 되고 이런 이야기들을 굉장히 이제 재밌게 들었다고 하시면서 이러한 역사를 이제 젠더를 통해서 보면 이제 우리가 무엇을 더 새롭게 볼 수 있고 무엇을 더 새롭게 알 수 있을지 우리가 앞으로 다 같이 더 생각해 보면 이제 더더욱 좋을 것 같다. 이렇게 이제 논평을 해주셨습니다. 그리고 네.
Just one more thing I guess I will add is, I do, because I work on and looking for women is like a thing that I do in South Asian art, partly because this is something that is not really talked about or nobody pays attention to. And I feel as if, me being a woman and having grown up in Korea and patriarchal system, I feel like there's sort of justice to be had looking for and finding their voices. So I sometimes overemphasize, but I think it's kind of qualified in a way that because the narrative has always been kind of male-centric. And that's what we actually had an AAS panel in spring 2023 titled Woman Looking for a Woman in South Asia's Pre-Colonial Visual Arts. And this was really all-woman panel. And I think that Jang Myung-woo 선생님 earlier said, like, he's the only, like, there's a gender imbalance here that, a lot of women researchers actually think about gender issue actively and how that actually comes from your place of being in the society and tradition. And I do really sort of think strongly of this sort of positionality of yourself vis-a-vis the material. It's not just something that you just study because you're interested, but I think where you stand in the universe actually does impact how you actually approach it. And so one of the questions we did ask was, can we better historicize the multiplicity of ways that womanhood and femininity have been conceptualized in and through South Asia's visual arts? Where was one of the questions, and I think you can easily say Korea's visual arts. And how was the idea of woman and of womanliness bound up with the ways of thinking about power relations, and how were they defined in the visual arts with respect to the elite classes? So, it's when you think about gender, you're always thinking about power relations, and so that relationality is such a key sort of, phrase to bring to mind when we're thinking about gender. I think that's where I'll end.
네, 감사합니다. 이제 김진아 선생님은 그 인도 미술에서 이제 여성이 어떻게 재현이 되었는가 이런 문제에 대해서 관심을 많이 가지고 이제 또 연구를 하셨고, 그리고 특히 이제 본인이 한국의 가부장적인 사회에서 여성으로 자랐기 때문에 이런 문제에 조금 더 본인이 관심이 있는 것은 아닌가. 그래서 간혹은 이제 이런 미술에 표현된 여성의 약간은 필요 이상으로 더 많은 목소리를 내가 심어주고 있는 것은 아닌가, 그렇게 이제 고민을 하실 때도 있지만, 또 동시에 대부분의 담론이 굉장히 남성적이기 때문에 이런 모든 것들을 다 고려할 수밖에 없다, 이렇게 이제 말씀을 하셨고요. 그리고 그 AAS 학회에서 한 번은 그 식민지 이전 맞죠? 식민지 이전 시대 미술, 식민지 이전 시대의 미술에서 여성이 본 여성이라는 주제로 이제 패널을 이제 꾸리신 적이 있었는데, 그때도 굉장히 많은 여성 참여자들이 이제 참여를 해주셨다고 합니다. 오늘도 이제 저희 청일정 한 분밖에 없으셨던 것처럼 그때도 되게 많은 이제 남성들이, 죄송한데 여성들이 이제 참여를 해주셨다고 하시는데요. 제가 이렇게 써놓은 게 글씨를 하도 제가 날려서가지고, 우리가 이제 공부를 할 때 나의 위치와 내가 연구하는 사물의 위치, 이것의 관계를 항상 고민하면서 연구를 하면 좋을 것 같다. 이런 말씀을 이제 해주셨습니다. 그리고 또 한 가지 이제, 그 다음에 이제 두 가지 더 말씀을 하셨는데요. 우리가 여성성, 이런 것을 생각할 때 하나의 여성성이 아니라 굉장히 그 다층적인, 다양한 여성성이 있다. 이런 것도 이제 고민을 하면 좋을 것 같다고 하셨고요. 그리고 젠더 문제를 다룰 때는 항상 어떤 권력이라는 문제가 끼어들 수밖에 없기 때문에 젠더를 연구하시는 분들께서는 항상 이 권력에 관한 것도 염두에 두실 수밖에 없을 것 같다. 이런 코멘트를 해주셨습니다. 감사합니다. Kyo, could you speak a little bit slowly because I am writing down what you were.
Yes, thank you. And let me just take this occasion to reiterate what a special occasion this is, that we're able to host one day of the annual conference of the Korean Art History Association here in Cambridge, and also that it would be on the subject of gender. I couldn't, for example, imagine the Japanese Art History Association devoting the theme of its annual conference to gender. I just couldn't imagine that. So I want to express my admiration for the organizers and the Art History Association.
먼저 이제 오늘 학회가 얼마나 특별한 자리였는지에 대해서 먼저 말씀을 하고 싶다고 하십니다. 이렇게 오늘 우리가 다 같이 모여서 젠더라는 주제를 가지고 미술사를 논할 수 있었던 것 자체가 굉장히 획기적인 일이다라고 말씀을 하시면서, 예를 들어서 일본 미술사 학회가 있다면, 그러니까 일본 미술 이 정도 규모의 일본 미술사 학회에서 젠더를 주제로 하루 종일 학회를 개최한다? 이런 일을 상상할 수 없다고 그렇게 말씀을 하셨습니다. To add a little bit, like now, I mean, currently we have female president for our association, and and the great majority of the board member are also women, so it's just the right timing to have this kind of conference.
I would hope that one of the advantages of being able to have this hosting arrangement would be that slightly different perspectives can be offered on some of these topics and research themes in Korean art history by hosting something in person abroad. And I was listening to each of the talks, not from the perspective of what I can learn about Korean art history, but from the perspective of what I can learn about art history through very strong and particular case studies in Korean cultural history. And I think there were many. It was remarkable to see how materials survive and congeal in the Korean context in ways that are specific and don't exist, as far as I know, elsewhere. Like, for example, in Dr. Sua McCormick's talk, the way there are excavations in the late Joseon period that yield remarkably well-preserved examples of textiles that have dates and can be associated with specific patrons. I don't know of that situation, a similar situation anywhere in East Asia, in China or Japan, or anywhere really in the world. And that has generated a certain possibility of research and a certain way of illuminating cultural history and gender, the history of gender, that is unique to Korea, I think. I was also, so I have so much I would love to say, but I want to be brief here and just talk a little bit about how Korea relates to the sociology of gender and art and the sociology of gender. And for me, a key term here is art world or art worlds, especially as defined by sociologists like Howard Becker, who has a very influential book called Art Worlds, where he talks about an art world as a very fragile ecosystem that requires certain types of a constellation of institutions and figures to survive. Of course, something like an academy, schools, critics, galleries, collectors, government institutions, and they congeal in very specific ways, and that's constantly evolving. And that's constantly interrelational with, of course, artistic practices and the way art is viewed and enters into discourse. And especially in the modern papers, but I would say what connects the pre-modern papers in the context of the court and the temple to the modern Korean papers is this concept of art worlds. And just to give one quick example, I co-organized a conference called the Art Academy in the Non-Western World around 5 years ago. And if I had known about Professor Yi-Sun Kim's work, we would have loved to include her in the case of Korea. But one of the things that constitutes an art world in early modern Europe is, of course, the Fine Arts Academy, which is a central, and the Salon, the annual state-sponsored academic exhibition, and the professional critics that judge works that are in there. And when that spreads to the non-West European world in the 19th and 20th century, one of the interesting things is that the academy has fixed practices that have to change with each with each new society into which it's introduced. And there's been wonderful research on Brazil and the nature of models in Brazil and issues of race and gender that relate to the practice and to Mexico, and so forth. And so the changes in the academy in each part of the world illuminate very specific social and cultural constructs of the local region. And I think one example of how this is illuminated is through Professor Yi-Sun Kim's research on the academy in Korea. But the way this relates to the politics of gender actually I think can be found everywhere, even when there are figures like Sunja Ri who traverse different art worlds. I should say that art worlds are vernacular. They're always local and vernacular. We think there's some large contemporary international art world. Actually, we're very balkanized into specific local art worlds all the time. But a universal art world is an absolute illusion here. So Sunja Ri is an absolutely important figure in cutting through these. The work of Yoon Suk Nam is also that is kind of creating an alternative it's an artistic practice of generating an alternative art world is how I see it, because of the, so the analysis of it is dependent upon what one understands of the contemporary Korean art world and how it works, the sociology and the politics and the gender dynamics of the art world and all the gallery owners and the collectors and so forth. So that was just one observation I had about how the Korean art community is generating, I think, through these studies, strong case studies that add inflections to larger issues in art history more generally. And I think that's so important for going forward for the world humanities. Thank you.
Thank you so much. 예, 말씀하신 부분을 이제 좀 정리해서 조금 이제 감추려서 말씀을 드리자면요. 이제 먼저 하신 말씀이 오늘 학회에서 이제 교수님께서 한국 미술을 배운 게 아니라 한국 미술의 다양한 사례를 통해서 미술사를 배운 것 같다라는 굉장히 이제 너무나 좋은 논평을 해주셨습니다. 그리고 이제 한국만의 굉장히 특수한 상황들이 너무나 많다. 예를 들면 오늘 학회에서 이제 이야기가 나왔던 조선말 근대기에 활약했던 그 남성 자수장 이런 것들은 정말 한국만의 특수한 상황인 것 같다. 이런 말씀을 해주셨고요. 그리고 또 이제 이제 아트 월드라는 개념을 여기에 대해서 이제 좋은 책도 나온 것이 있다라고 말씀을 하시면서 제가 아트 월드니까 일단은 미술 세계 이렇게 번역을 해보겠습니다. 그래서 이제 최근에 나온 책에 따르면 이 아트 월드라는 것이 굉장히 이렇게 프레자일, 이렇게 아주 뭐라 그럴까요? 너무 이제 예민하고 부서지기 쉽고 막 이렇게 민감한 이런 에코시스템과 같다. 이런 이제 학설이 있다고 합니다. 그래서 이 굉장히 이제 뭐라 그럴까요? 정교한 이 아트월드가 부서지기 쉽고 정교한 아트월드가 굉장히 복잡한 시스템, 뭐 아카데미, 논평, 갤러리, 뭐 또 정부 이런 것들에 의해서 굉장히 많은 복합적인 영향을 받으면서 끝없이 변화하는 어떤 에코시스템이다. 이제 계속 이제 어떤 살아있는 존재 같은 거라는 그렇게 또 생각할 수가 있을 것 같은데요. 그래서 이제 교수님께서 한 5년 전에 아트 아카데미, 아카데미. 근데 이게 이제 서구권에서 원래 아카데미가 생겼고, 이제 다른 나라에 이제 전파가 된 것이기 때문에 비서구권의 아카데미에 대한 비교 발표를 하는 그런 학술대회라고 하셨는지 패널이라고 이거를 이제 기획을 하셨었는데요. 그때 이제 김인순 선생님 연구를 알았다면 그때 참 초대 드렸으면 좋았을 것 같다. 이제 그런 말씀을 또 하셨습니다. 5년 전 그 학회에서는 뭐 브라질, 멕시코 등등에서 이제 각 지역별로 이렇게 변형이 되고 그런 이제 아카데미에 대한 다양한 이제 이야기를 한 적이 있다. 이렇게 말씀을 하셨습니다. 그리고 이제 이 아카데미라는 것, 그리고 이 아트월드, 미술 세계라는 것이 어디에 가거나 그 지역에 이제 지역성을 띌 수밖에 없다. 이런 말씀을 하시면서 이와 관련해서 이제 이성자 작품에 대해서도 이제 말씀을 해주셨고 또 이제 윤성남의 경우에도 이분은 어떻게 보면 어떤 대안적인 미술 세계를 열으신 분인 것 같다. 이런 논평을 해주셨습니다. 감사합니다. Oh, it's exactly. Hi, what do you think? It's up to you. Do you want to? Yeah, okay. So we had a very long and very productive day, and we thank you to all of you, the audiences and the presenters, and also the chairs and the discussants, and to all three of you. So we are wrapping up this conference here, and I hope that our discussion here, I hope that it will not just stop here. I hope that we will have like similar conferences in the future again and again, and we all like continue like contact each other and continue conversations in the coming years. Thank you so much.